shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world, and then shall the end come.
Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dave Robbins with End Time Ministries, and I want to thank you for joining me for Tuesday's edition of End of the Age. And I've got kind of a unique program today because there's a lot going on in the news. There's stuff going on all over the world, the conflict in Syria, what's going on with North Korea, and a lot of different things. If you understand the prophecies of the Bible at all, you understand that with all of the prophecies converging at the same time, we're just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ. We talk about him in many ways. There's many ways I can prove that. We have people call in or email us all the time and say, hey, you guys are saying we're living in the last days. Prove it. And we ask them, which prophecy do you want us to discuss? The mark of the beast, the temple being rebuilt, the peace agreement, the sixth trumpet war, world government, world religion. I mean, all of them. We can talk about every one and show how we're either watching them come to pass right now or we're seeing precursors to every single one of them. So it lets us know we truly are living in the end time. But there's one specific topic I want to talk to you about today. It's the coming one world government and the ongoing effort to establish that. It's already really established in the earth today. It's prophesied about in Scripture, and every day there's ongoing efforts to establish that world government in the earth. So I'm going to talk about Donald Trump today and what's going on with some meetings that he's having about the Paris Climate Agreement and how there might be a little bit more to the meeting than what you might think. So let's talk about it. And I'll go through some history and different things, give you a little background. But President Donald Trump's top aides are meeting today to discuss whether the United States should remain as part of the Paris Climate Accord. So we don't want, and actually, as far as like us here at End Time Ministries, if you understand prophecy, we don't want the United States to be part of the Paris Climate Accord. Why? Well, the Paris Climate Agreement is actually helping to implement Agenda 2030, which is the global governance of every person on the earth. Production, consumption, they want to control everyone. And in a roundabout way, we're helping to implement that by staying in the Paris Climate Agreement. So you say, whoa, that's a big statement. Well, let me explain. First of all, to begin with, End Time Ministries really specializes in using current events to reveal how Bible prophecy written 2,000 to 2,500 years ago is coming to pass right now. This revelation of these prophecies obviously lets us know that we truly are living in the end times just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ. And one such prophecy is the formation of the presently emerging world government. You've heard about us talk about it many times here at End of the Age, and if you've followed politics and religion for years, End Time Magazine, our radio, television programs, we talk about the coming one world government. It's already established in many ways. If you could talk about the world order, the international community, the liberal international order. These are all synonyms for the world government prophesied to rule the earth in the very near future. Now, right now, it doesn't really have the teeth that they want it to have, but those teeth are quickly growing, and the Antichrist will actually be over that just in the very near future. So many of you will recognize it by this world government, by the organizations that are used to facilitate its mandates. So you say, well, what's that? Well, I'm referring to, let's say, the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the International Criminal Court, the World Health Organization, and there are many, many, many others. These are institutions of world government. And so there are people that set the agenda, and these institutions are designed to carry out those agendas worldwide on a global scale. It's called world government. Well, these entities actually provide the agenda, and then the nations of the world are expected to adhere, and then it comes down from the nations to our each individual state, and then it comes down to us. It all trickles all the way down because they're trying to control every person on earth, and you'll see that before I'm done today. Well, according to the prophecy, the end-time world government will eventually be ruled by a very evil person. You and I would know him as the Antichrist. He's going to be much worse than an Adolf Hitler, a Stalin, Mao Zedong, much worse than them. That is why you have to understand the effort to establish a global government, and you have to consider the Bible prophecies. If you don't understand Bible prophecy, we would never even be thinking about a world government. We would think it was actually probably a good thing, trying to do away with war and the great humanitarian efforts they do and things like that. You could get into the mindset. I've talked to some kids that have come out of college recently, and they sat in my office and tried to convince me that the United Nations was a good thing. And I'm like, whoa, hold on a second. You've been taught the surface of it. Let's get down in, let me explain the history of the United Nations and what it was designed to be, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So what you're getting taught in high school, college, and things like that, you're not going to be taught the real motives behind all of this stuff. So really, if you look back at it, the efforts of a world government today, those have happened several times throughout history. And just like every historical effort to establish a world empire, Satan has been the instigator. Go all the way back. And the prophesied end-time world government is going to be no different. Throughout all of time, many leaders of global empires have eventually thought of themselves, they've got so much power that they've ended up thinking of themselves as gods. I mean, think of it. Nebuchadnezzar, all those guys pretty much, they ruled the entire known world during their era. So they actually got to the point where they thought of themselves as gods. And this is and I'm going to get back to Donald Trump. I'm laying some foundational stones here. They got to thinking, these world empire leaders got to be thinking themselves as gods. And this is exactly what the leader of the final world government is going to do, the Antichrist. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 2 through 4 states that ye be not soon shaken in mind or be troubled, neither by spirit, nor by word, nor by letter as from us, as that day of Christ is at hand. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, the Antichrist, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he as God, he thinks of himself, he's going to claim to be God, and he sits in the temple of God, the third temple that's coming, showing himself that he is God. So just like many leaders, world empire leaders that have preceded him, he will feel like he is a God to people. And he's going to claim to be that. And of course, that event's called the abomination of desolation. And so the Bible tells us that this entity, this world governing entity, this last world empire, is going to be destroyed by Jesus when he returns to earth. That is why the United States, it is imperative that they must not be part of the world government in the end time. Because when the Lord comes back, he's going to tear down, he's going to destroy human governments. The system of world government, he's going to tear it down, he's going to destroy it. And so we don't want to be a part of that in the end time. And of course, you know, from the prophecies of the Bible, we've explained them. We don't believe the United States is going to be a part of that. And so that's why one of the reasons we feel we should pull out of this Paris Climate Agreement, because it's helping to establish the one world government system here on earth, and we don't want to be a part of that. And Trump's advisors are meeting with him today to try to influence him, or to try to just discuss whether we should be part of it or not. And most of them are saying we should stay with it. And we don't, obviously we don't feel that we should do that. But here's the deal. Without a prophetic view of this world government, if you didn't understand the prophecies of the Bible, like I said, you would think, hey, this is a good thing. And the influential members of our American society, they could actually make the mistake of yielding up our sovereignty. You say, well, leaders of the United States wouldn't do that. It's been done for decades. They've already been doing it for decades now. Yielding up the sovereignty of the United States and saying, hey, we'll implement the agenda of the world governing body here. And so that's why it's very important. They've been doing it for decades now. Now, many of you are aware that this is already happening in many ways as we speak. Let's look at the President Obama. The previous administration obligated the United States citizens to work towards the full implementation of the Transforming Our World, the United Nations Transforming Our World, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. It's the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that make up the United Nations 2030 Agenda, and they're simply a way to redistribute the wealth of the world. It's a socialistic platform. Redistribute the wealth of the world and to control the consumption and production of every single person on the planet. So they're not talking about, let's just control the United States. The reason they want to control the United States and every other nation on earth is so they can control the people of that. You say, well, hold on a minute. The United States, or the United Nations, they go in when there's a tsunami and they'll help the people, and all these different catastrophes. The United Nations shows up. They do that to a certain extent, but that's not what the United Nations was designed to be, this humanitarian, wonderful organization. That's not what they were designed to be. They were designed to be a socialistic, one world governing body. And so you have to look at the foundation of the whole thing, what it was designed to be, the charter. Read the charter sometime. It's a socialistic platform. It's a socialistic, one world governing body. It's what it was designed to be from the beginning. And they are still carrying that out to this day. So really, in doing so, in implementing this 2030 agenda, the United States is fulfilling the will of the United Nations global governing agenda. Because not just of the Obama administration, but many administrations before him have yielded up some parts of our sovereignty, the United States sovereignty, to the United Nations. So let's talk about it a little bit. In January of 2016, because I want to bring this right down into our living room. In January 2016, the then United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon made a very prominent statement at the Abu Dhabi Action Day. And he stated this: the Paris Agreement, the climate agreement that the nations of the earth have all committed to, was adopted just after the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. And he states this: these are the Paris Climate Agreement and the 2030 Agenda are twin plans for transformative progress. The Sustainable Development Goals are the vision. The climate change is the commitment. This vision and commitment should go hand in hand, and they are part of our grand design. So there's a grand design behind this whole thing. It's not just let's help the climate change of the world, and let's all these different efforts that the refugees and all this stuff. There's a grand design behind all of this, and we know what it is. It's world government. And he goes on to state that these should complement each other. They work hand in hand. If we don't implement the climate change agreement, which, remember, what Donald Trump is meeting on today to see if they want to keep the United States as a part of that, he says, Ban Ki-moon said, if we don't implement the climate change agreement, all of these 17, the Sustainable Development Goals, will not be fully implemented. Well, that's a good thing because it's world government. We don't want that here in the United States. We signed a Declaration of Independence, not interdependence, on a world government. So you say, well, grand design. Grand design for what? It's global government. That's what this is designed to do. They're designed. The Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Climate Agreement, Ban Ki-moon said these should work hand in hand for the grand design of world government. So the Paris Climate Agreement that Trump is meeting with his advisors today on is helping to implement the Agenda 2030, which is the global governance of every person on earth. It's helping to implement that into all of our lives. We don't want that. But there are many people, even in the Trump administration, that they're advising him to stay with that. Now, some of them are against it, which is a good thing. Trump has actually said on the campaign trail, I'm going to get us out of that. That's a great thing. We don't want to stay part of that. So Reuters reports that advisors to President Donald Trump will meet today to discuss whether to recommend that he withdraw the United States from the Paris Climate Accord. And that's stated by the White House official, and he said this on yesterday. The accord agreed on by nearly 200 countries in Paris all the way back in 2015. It aims to limit planetary warming, because you're talking about global warming, climate change. That's the big scare tactic by the United Nations. The aim is to limit planetary warming in part by slashing carbon dioxide, which we need. Our plants need carbon dioxide. They're wanting to cut that. And other emissions from the burning of fossil fuels. Under the climate agreement, the United States committed to reducing its emissions by 26 up to 28% from 2005 levels between then and 2025. Trump has said the United States should cancel the deal, which is awesome, but he has been mostly quiet on the issue since he was elected in November. The advisors expected to attend Tuesday's meeting include Energy Secretary Rick Perry and the Environmental Protection Agency Minister Scott Pruitt. Well, obviously Perry, our former governor here in Texas, at his confirmation hearings in January, he softened a previous position that the science behind climate change was phony. Now, if you've heard us, Irvin, myself, over the years now, we've proven time and time again that the propaganda machine of the United Nations, they're teaching this global warming which leads to climate change. That's all a hoax. The humans are not putting off carbon emissions that's making the planet warm up to the point where they've now changed to global warming to climate change, and all these tornadoes and different things are a result of all this. That's all propaganda. And so Perry took a hard stance on that originally. He said, that's all phony. But now he's taken a softer stance on it, because there's a big difference in running for office and all these different things and then being put in a position where you got to make decisions. So these guys are finding that out. Donald Trump's finding that out. And last week, Pruitt, who was at the meeting today, who is the former Oklahoma Attorney General, said that the United States should exit the agreement because it was a bad deal for the country. I totally agree with him. It is a bad deal for our country. The Obama administration signed us on to implement the United Nations Global Governing Agenda here in the United States. It was an attack on coal-powered plants and different things, and they wanted to implement their agenda here. The Obama administration said, yes, we will do that. And so Trump came along during his campaign and said, we're going to get out of that. That was a good thing. Well, now we're going to see over the next few weeks what's really going to happen. And they're meeting today on that. That's why I wanted to talk to you about it, because the Bible says there's a world government that's going to be established just prior to the second coming. And this, according to Ban Ki-moon and many of the world leaders, is it's ongoing efforts to implement that world government here in our society. The Daily Caller reports that Tom Pyle, the president of the American Energy Alliance, he actually says that corporations want to turn this Paris Agreement into an agreement that they can profit from. So it's not necessarily just about the environment at this point, which honestly it never was. It was always about the furtherance of the world government, because they know it's all propaganda. It's all a hoax. There are people that believe that, but they don't understand really what's going on. This is all the ongoing effort to establish a world government in the earth. And so Pyle stated that a number of large companies are calling on President Trump to remain in the agreement because they stand to make a lot of money. They don't care about the environment. They're going to make a lot of money from it. And that it will stamp out their smaller competitors and negotiate for their own special handouts. Now, this was very key when during the campaign that Trump was saying, hey, I'm not going to be bought by lobbyists and all these other special interest groups. But now he's got all these people saying, hey, we better stay in there because we're going to make a lot of money. And so that's why if Trump is going to be true to his word, I hope he is, that he's not bought and paid for. We'll see what happens over the next few weeks. There's a lot of big things happening just in the first 100, 200 days of his presidency that are letting us know what's really what's really behind Donald Trump. He's done a lot of good things. He may have made a few mistakes, but who wouldn't? But we'll see what happens over the next several weeks to determine how this next 4 years is going to go. And Pyle went on to state that may be a winning strategy for the executives at Exxon and other companies, but it's not for the U.S. economy as a whole. I totally agree with you, Mr. Pyle. And Trump actually promised to agree to withdraw from the Paris Agreement during his campaign as part of his overall plan to roll back the Obama administration global warming regulations hampering the energy production. So during the campaign, he said, hey, I'm getting us out of that because I'm going to be all about America. We're going to ramp up production. We're going to buy American. It's going to be all about America. And so I hope he stands by that over the next few weeks when he's got to make the decision to either leave us into this climate agreement or pull us out. But after taking office, now we're seeing really what's going on, and he has done a lot of good things. But he seems to have waffled a little bit on pulling us out of the Paris Agreement. I hope that's not the case. He's going to have to make the decision before a meeting that's coming up in May. And his advisors are meeting with him today. They're really split on the issue. And they're going to meet this week, today, to hash out what should be done. So after today, he'll pretty much know which way he's going to go. And so I'll be interested to read the news tonight and tomorrow morning to see really what's come of this meeting, unless they're just going to be closed mouth about it until he makes a decision. But Chief Strategist Steve Bannon, that he opposes staying in the Paris Agreement, while, listen at this, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, Ivanka Trump, and Jared Kushner, and Gary Cohn, they all support it. So they're all saying we need to stay in that, which that's a bad thing. I totally disagree with them on that point. We do not need to stay in that. It's the ongoing efforts to implement a world government here. They need to understand that. I wish Irvin could have a conversation with all of them around that big table where Trump meets with all these people. It'd be awesome for Irvin Baxter to be sitting across the table saying, hey, Mr. Trump, the prophecies say this. Get us out of that. And there may come a time in the near future when we get to do that. I'd love to be a fly on the wall at that meeting. And then the Tillerson wing of the White House believe the Paris Agreement can be used as a diplomatic lever to achieve foreign policy objectives. I don't want to stay and implement world government policies here in the United States to do that. I want us to be a strong nation, strong military, and carry out things that way. I don't want to make deals with the United Nations and carry out world governing objectives here in the United States to have leverage to achieve foreign policy objectives. We don't want that. There's other ways to do it. Be a strong nation. People will have to listen to you. They won't have a choice. And then he goes on to state that some coal companies and Republicans believe that Obama's Paris Pledge can be substituted with subsidies emissions control technology. Powell says that plans to stay in the Paris agreement are based on major misconceptions about the United Nations deal. I totally agree with him. He states that there's a misconception that the Trump administration can simply renegotiate the Paris Agreement to give the U.S. a better deal. But that's simply not the case, as the deal only leaves the door open for more stringent commitments, not less stringent. We need to get out of that. It's like a big cobweb. The more you try to get out, the more entangled you get. That's the United Nations. We need to sever ties with that completely. We don't want to be a part of that world government in the last days. Why? The Bible says God's coming back to tear all that down. Satan is behind all of that. He always has been in all of these world empires. Satan's been behind all of that to take people's mind off of God and away from Him, and to get them to worship the man He puts up so they can in turn be worshiping Him. So Pyle goes on to state, if the Trump administration truly wants to strengthen our economy and deliver a better deal to American families and businesses, it should follow through on its promise to pull out of the agreement altogether. I totally 100% agree with Mr. Pyle. Nearly 200 nations in 2015 backed the Paris Agreement when it was announced that it went into effect in 2016. The Obama administration joined the accords last year without Senate approval, committing the U.S. to cut greenhouse gas emissions, like I said, 26 to 28% by 2025. Now, some argue that not pulling out of the Paris Agreement would be largely symbolic, since Trump's already begun to roll back the Obama-era regulations aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions, because it's a hoax. All of this, the propaganda that came from the United Nations. We got global warming, which leads to climate change because of the emissions that the United States and China are putting off. It's all a hoax. It's a wealth redistribution scheme by the world government to redistribute the wealth of the world from developed nations to underdeveloped nations. This is the agenda behind it all. So when we get back from the break, we'll continue on discussing world government in the earth today.
From Here to Armageddon, a new exciting 8-lesson series to share with your friends and family. Order yours right away.
Answering many questions like, how far are we from the Battle of Armageddon? What will happen between now and then? Where are we on the timeline? Your questions answered in this exciting 8-lesson series, From Here to Armageddon.
Go to endtime.com or call 1-800-END-TIME. That's 1-800-END-TIME, 1-800-363-8463. Order yours right away.
Today I have some exciting news to share with you. You can now become a magazine subscriber for life. You will receive first-class benefits that will include a lifetime membership to End Time Magazine, as well as an unlimited access to the digital version of the magazine. You will also receive 20% off of all future orders at endtime.com, well, at least till the rapture happens. Never worry about missing one important issue or forgetting to renew. You can rest assured when something happens in the news pertaining to Bible prophecy, you will be informed with the most recent cutting-edge material available. End Time Magazine has been the forefront of End Time Ministries since the beginning, and we would love to join with you in this first ever opportunity of becoming a magazine subscriber for life. Join today by calling 1-800-END-TIME. That's 1-800-363-8463, or go to endtime.com.
If your station only carries the first 30 minutes of End of the Age, go to endtime.com and click the watch button to continue today's broadcast. You can also finish up later by clicking the archives button.
So everyone, we're talking about the establishment of a world governing body here in the United States, even around the world, but here in the United States, it's where it's going to affect all of us if we stay part of this. And today, Donald Trump and his advisors are meeting to see whether we should stay in the Paris Climate Agreement or not. He said all during his campaign he's going to pull us out. That's absolutely what should happen. And he's meeting with his advisors today to see, well, should I stay in or not? He's trying to make that decision. Well, Ebel, one of the advisors that there and others have warned that staying in the Paris agreement opens the Trump administration up to lawsuits, threaten his deregulatory agenda. The White House is expected to announce their decision on the Paris deal at the G7 meeting in Italy at the end of May. So he's got a few weeks here where he's going to try to make a decision, but today is the big meeting about it. So what I want to do, the efforts to establish a world government today, I want to get a little deeper into this because I don't want you to, I don't want to just talk about the Trump meeting and then you not fully understand what's going on. So let me provide you with a little history behind all of this. Then we can talk about the ulterior motives behind the Paris Agreement, because yes, there is an ulterior motive. Any regulation that the United Nations puts out, any agenda, there's a motive behind that. They don't sell it as, hey, we've got a motive. They just say, oh, this is going to be good for our common home, or this is good for everyone on the planet collectively, and this, that, and the other. But at the end of the day, it boils down to global governance. They're running off the charter that was signed back in 1945. So the United Nations was advancing its efforts toward a global government with the signing of the Paris Climate Accord. So what it was all about. WorldNet Daily reported back then, I'm giving you some history here, that the United Nations in New York, they held a signing ceremony. This is in 2015, but you've got to understand this. And if this was with the heads of state, foreign ministers, and government officials with formal powers, they gathered to sign a 197-nation Paris Climate Agreement. Pretty much all the nations on the earth. It was unanimous. The United Nations insiders understood that signing the Paris Climate Agreement was intended to affirm the organization's 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. President Obama knew exactly what was going on here, and you're going to see that here in a minute. And it was a plan, they said, to end poverty. Now, this is how they sold it. It's a plan to end poverty. Well, that sounds good. I'd like to end poverty. I'd like to get everybody working. I don't want to give them a handout, but I'd like to end poverty. I mean, what would be wrong with that? To fight inequality? Sure. There doesn't need to be any inequality if you're willing to work hard enough and this other. And injustice, I don't believe there should be any injustice. So all of this sounds pretty good. And to tackle climate change, to me, that's a joke because it's all a hoax. By 2030, this is how they were selling it. And they said it's a plan some critics called, get this, a blueprint for global governance. That was the agenda behind the whole thing. Agenda 2030 is seen as a reboot of the controversial Agenda 21 plan, which was an agenda for global governance, adopted clear back in 1992, which the United Nations described as a comprehensive plan of action to be taken globally, nationally, and locally. So not just Russia or Brazil or clear over in Saudi Arabia, not just on the other side of the world, but nationally and locally here in Wiley, Texas, where I live, or in Richmond, Indiana, or wherever, locally, by organizations of the United Nations system, governments, and major groups in every area in which the humans impact the environment. So every person on earth. That's what this was supposed to encompass. The agenda was made clear by the United Nations decision to convene a high-level thematic debate on achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, most of you would know it as, to be coincident with the signing of the Paris Climate Agreement. It was an effort to implement a world governing system throughout the world, and 197 nations signed on to it. They stated, we're gathering to discuss the Sustainable Development Goal implementation on the eve of the signing of the Paris Agreement by a great number of world leaders. That was stated by the UN Deputy Secretary General Jan Eliasson. And she said on the signing of the occasion, this is an important signal. The development of and climate agendas are inseparable and mutually reinforcing. One cannot be achieved without the other. Of course, that's what Ban Ki-moon said at the time, the former General Secretary of the United Nations. They go on to state, reducing the effects of climate change is one of the Sustainable Development Goals, but it is also a crucial factor for progress on nearly all the other goals. So these are all tied hand in hand. We cannot achieve the Sustainable Development Goals on water, food, cities, and transport. This is what they're wanting to control. Think about this. Water, food, cities, and transport. And for instance, without reducing the risk of climate change, none of these things can be, it's not going to work for them to regulate all of this. They got to have the scare tactic of global warming, which leads to climate change, so the world governing body can regulate us on these things. So the signing ceremony included remarks by UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, French President Francois Hollande, and actor Leonardo DiCaprio. They got an actor in here. They've had several of them, who was listed on the program as the UN Messenger of Peace with a special focus on climate change. Remember, they're trying to sell this to the world. And of course, since that meeting in 2015, Leonardo DiCaprio put out his climate change propaganda movie, Before the Flood. And Al Gore is now taking another crack at his scare tactics while coming out with his climate change propaganda movie, An Inconvenient Sequel. He had An Inconvenient Truth originally. Now he's got An Inconvenient Sequel. And both of these movies, they're easily debunked because human-induced global warming, which leads to climate change, is an absolute hoax. So way back in May 2015, both President Obama and the Vatican, under the leadership of Pope Francis, they were equally committed to elevating climate change to a top public policy priority ahead of issues such as, at that time, the surge of ISIS in Iraq and Syria. And remember back then, a couple years ago, they were burning Christians, cutting their heads off. They were taking the pilots of planes, putting them in a cage and drowning them, and putting videos and watching them drown. But yet, when they all come together, they didn't even talk about that. They were talking about climate change. Because at the end of the day, they're pushing this global governing agenda. Well, in doing so, both ignored a growing body of scientific evidence challenging the assumptions on which the theory of human-induced climate change is based. It's a hoax. There were top scientists in every field that were proving it wrong, but yet they ignored that and went with the UN scientists that said, oh, hey, this is happening. Well, of course they're going to do that. They're on the UN payroll. And so in UN terminology, climate change has become a code phrase expressing the globalist argument that human-induced climate change is a scientific reality that can only be reduced by a government-imposed cap and carbon dioxide emissions, the cap and trade laws, and they got to put a cap on them. That's how they're going to redistribute the wealth of the world. And it's achieved through systematic replacement of carbon fuels with renewable energies, including wind and solar. So at that time, President Obama and Pope Francis worked together, along with countless other leaders, to support this global governing effort. In September of 2015, President Obama spoke. You say, well, why are we talking about this today, Dave? Because the Paris Climate Agreement that they signed us onto, President Trump is considering pulling out of that. They're making the decisions over the next few weeks. The big meeting with his advisors is today. And so these guys were selling us down the river on global governance, yielding up our sovereignty, a lot of it. And President Trump is making the decision over the next few weeks, should I pull us out of that? So it's a huge deal, and you need to know about it. It's the fulfillment of Bible prophecy. So clear back in September of 2015, President Obama spoke with little fanfare, really, to the closing session of the United Nations Sustainable Development Summit that was convened as a high-level plenary meeting of the General Assembly, at which the U.S. and 192 other UN members unanimously adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. He stated, and so today, we commit ourselves to new sustainable development goals, including our goal of ending extreme poverty in our world. And Obama said this at the UN meeting. He goes on to state, we do so understanding how difficult the task may be. We suffer no illusions of challenges ahead, but we understand this is something that we must do we must commit ourselves to. And he absolutely did. He committed the United States to do that. Well, when Pope Francis spoke at that time to the United Nations, it was on September 25th of 2015, his speech served as the opening address to the 2030 Agenda Summit. In introducing the Pope, United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said, addressing the Pope, your visit today coincides with the adoption of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Now remember, that's a global governing effort in the world today. Pope Francis showed up there to support that. Ban Ki-moon referenced the papal encyclical on climate change, Laudato Si, translated as, Praise be to you, a medieval Italian phrase taken from St. Francis of Assisi's 13th century poem prayer, Canticle of the Creatures, written to praise God as the creator of all. The message of the encyclical is critical as we really approach the pivotal climate change agreement at that time in Paris in December of that year. Ban continued, and he stated, across the global agenda, His Holiness is a resounding voice of conscience. He has cried out for compassion for the world's refugees, migrants, and solidarity with people trapped in conflict and poverty. So let's talk about Pope Francis on climate change, because that's what all of this, President Obama, the Pope, all of these different world leaders, they were all selling the world on, we need to do this because climate change is going to destroy the planet. If you read the encyclical that Pope Francis wrote, it was all about the destruction of the planet because of human-induced global warming, which leads to climate change. So what was his solution in the encyclical? It's a world government. You're going to see that here in a minute if I can get to it. I got a lot left to do, but hopefully we'll get there. And Pope Francis, in the words spoken publicly in his first visit to the United States, Pope Francis was selling the climate change accord that was coming in December of that year. He chose climate change as the topic of his remarks at the arrival ceremony held on the south lawn of the White House. Many of you probably seen that speech. He stated, Mr. President, I find it encouraging that you are proposing an initiative for reducing air pollution. Accepting the urgency, it seems clear to me also that climate change is a problem which can no longer be left to our future generations. So, when we get back from the break, I'm going to continue on because all of the world leaders at that time were selling us on, hey, this is a thing that's needed, this Paris Climate Agreement, the Sustainable Development Goals, and that we've got to do this or the Earth's going to implode and all these different things are going to happen. But it was all designed to lead us into world government.
Join End Time Prophecy students in Jerusalem. Jerusalem Prophecy College. Study from the convenience of your own home through our online learning courses. Taught by Dr. Irvin Baxter. Learn about the prophecies of the Bible that will soon come to pass. Take advantage of this opportunity to learn valuable information. Save thousands of dollars by attending JPC online. Attend for only $50 per semester. Jerusalem Prophecy College offers 5 semesters. These courses include Understanding the End Time, Theology and End Time Christianity, Daniel commentaries, and Revelation commentaries 1 and 2. Each 16-week semester can be completed at your own pace. Enrollment ends May 5th.
So enroll today. Learn more about the times we are living in and how you can be prepared. Be sure to sign up right away at JerusalemProphecyCollege.com.
So you kind of see what's going on here. You've got the Bible prophesies a world government that's going to be established in the earth just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ. Now you have people making huge efforts, all the way really back in 1945 with the establishment of the United Nations. Then they started adding all kinds of different organizations, the World Health Organization, the International Monetary Fund, that set the agendas, and then the nations of the earth are supposed to carry out their agenda, implement that in their nations. Well, now a couple huge efforts towards world government was the Paris Climate Agreement that was signed and the Sustainable Development Goals, the Agenda 2030, transforming the world into what? Into getting everybody to being ran by this global government. That's what this all designed to do. And so in 2015, President Obama, Pope Francis, and many other world leaders were selling the world on this when they were giving speeches. We need to support this. Yield up your sovereignty to this. And so they signed on to it. So earlier that year, in 2015, the Sustainable Development Goals were signed in September. The Paris Climate Agreement was signed in December of that year. And I think it was in June of that year, Pope Francis wrote an encyclical that was, I don't know how many pages, like 70 pages, if I remember right. I read the whole thing several times. But Pope Francis the whole encyclical, pretty much, I'm going to say probably 95% of it was devoted to the fact that it was the climate change encyclical, the climate encyclical. And he was saying that as human-induced emissions that we're giving off are causing we're hurting all kinds of the planet, the plant life, I mean everything. And we're destroying our planet. And if we don't do something drastic, then we're not going to have a planet any longer in the next few years. It's going to be drastic, total catastrophe everywhere. Well, when he gets all the way down to the bottom, there's an ulterior motive for the encyclical. He's propping up what everybody else is as well. So the question is, what was Pope Francis's solution to the coming imaginary global warming climate change apocalypse? Read the encyclical, you'll see what I'm talking about. Well, it was a world political authority or a world government. That was the solution. We need a global political authority to oversee this. Everybody yield up their sovereignty and answer to this world political authority. Well, many popes over the years have called for a global political authority or a world government. Do your research. We've quoted them many times. You go back and look at several of the popes because they have such influence that they've worked together with world leaders to promote this world governing body. So towards the end of the encyclical, Pope Francis provided us with what he felt was the best solution. You can read the encyclical. With the best solution to the supposed climate change debacle. Given this, he states, given this situation, the global warming which leads to climate change propaganda, given this situation, it is essential to devise stronger and more efficiently organized international institutions, world government, with functionaries who are appointed fairly by agreement among national governments and empowered, get this, to impose sanctions. If you don't adhere to this, these people should be empowered to impose sanctions on you. He states, as Benedict XVI has affirmed in continuity with the social teaching of the Church, to manage the global economy. Now get the global economy. So they're talking about world government here. To manage the global economy, to revive economies hit by the crisis, to avoid any deterioration of the present crisis and the greater imbalances that would result, to bring about integral and timely disarmament, food security and peace, to guarantee the protection of the environment, and to regulate migration. For all of this, there is an urgent need of a true world political authority or world government, as my predecessor, Blessed John 23rd, indicated some years ago. So finally, right here, after, it's many pages. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's like 30 or 40,000 some words. Finally, in plain English, the objective of the entire encyclical, remember, just later on that year, the encyclical came out in June. Later on that year was the Sustainable Development Goals, which they had Pope Francis speak at. Just prior to, in December, the Paris Climate Agreement, which is what Trump is discussing in the White House today, they were talking about we need a world political authority, a world government. Really, the crisis was irrelevant because it's a hoax. It's not even happening. And so whether it's Global cooling, which back in the 60s, 70s, they were saying we're having a new ice age coming. Whether it's an economic collapse or immigration, think about what they're talking about in the news all the time. They're keeping people in fear mode. Or the threat of nuclear war, which we know is coming, the Sixth Trumpet War, if you understand Bible prophecy. Food shortages and plagues, whether real or imagined, it doesn't matter. As long as it produces fear, the global elite will use it to promote a one world government. That's the goal of this whole thing. Now, this is what Trump is dealing with in the White House today. This Paris Climate Agreement. All of these world leaders were selling it as we've got to do this Paris Climate Agreement. The world is going to burn up if we don't do something about it. So what have they all said that we need to do? We need to have a world governing body that manages this whole thing, and we need to put cap and trade laws on the emissions that all the United States and these developed countries are doing, and they can buy certain credits from underdeveloped nations. You say, well, how does that fix anything? It doesn't fix anything. It's a wealth redistribution scheme from the socialistic platform of the United Nations. That's the agenda. There is no global warming which leads to climate change. God can cool the entire planet down by 10 degrees if He wanted to tomorrow morning. He regulates. God is the only one that regulates the climate. He's been doing it since He created the earth. Every day the climate's going to change. And so consequently, it's a hoax. It's all designed to promote the one world governing body mentioned of in Scripture. So let's talk about the prophesied one world government, because they're wrestling with this. They don't even know it in the White House today. But they're wrestling with these issues. Should the United States stay in this world governing effort, which is the Paris Climate Agreement? It's an effort it's a further effort to establish a world government in the earth. They're wrestling with it in the White House today. So the prophesied one world government. We've got to talk about the prophetic implications of this. We know that global warming is just really a ruse. It's a hoax that's used by the global elite to establish a world government. That's all it is. It's a scare tactic. For years, many world leaders that have during their era, they've used, whether it's the gods or anything they could use as a fear tactic to keep the people in fear mode. And then once they get in fear mode, if they can get them scared enough, they can pretty much impose anything they want to on them in the name of security. And so look at what's going on with the global warming climate change hoax today. The propaganda is being spread to get everybody scared enough so they can implement more and more world government on everybody. And now President Trump comes along and says, global warming is a hoax. We're not going to stay part of that Paris Climate Agreement. They're discussing that as we speak. So the question is, from a prophetic viewpoint, is it time for the establishment of the end-time world government on the timeline? Is it time for this world government to be established? Well, let's look at the final 7 years, because that's really going to tell the tale what's going on. Once the final 7 years begins, we'll know. We've got specific timelines that we can follow. So let's look at it from that vantage point, the final 7 years. Obviously, if you've heard this program at all, or even if you haven't heard it, there's going to be a peace agreement in the Middle East between the Israelis and the Palestinians. That peace agreement, it marks the beginning of the final 7 year period. Daniel 9:27 prophesies that the Antichrist will confirm a covenant with many for a final 7 year period, just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ in the Battle of Armageddon. The accord is going to be a confirmation of God's covenant with Abraham that Israel would always have a homeland in the Promised Land, all the way back Genesis 15, verse 18. The fulfillment of this prophecy will be the signing of a peace agreement between Israel and the Palestinians. The prophesied agreement has got to do three things. You say, well, how will we know what if it's going to be the peace agreement? It's going to establish a Palestinian state in Judea. It's going to allow the Jewish settlers presently living in Judea to remain in their homes and living as a Jewish minority in the new Palestinian state. And 3, it's going to place the Temple Mount under an internationally supervised, probably the United Nations, a sharing arrangement allowing both Jews, Muslims, and Christians, everybody, to worship there. So when the key is, when you see the prophesied agreement, then you can know, and we'll be screaming it on our television, radio programs, and on our magazine, you can know that the final 7 years to the Battle of Armageddon and the second coming of Jesus has begun. Now, somewhere around this time, there's going to be a 6th trumpet war. And we've got to note it that the war's coming, and it's going to emanate out of the Middle East region. It's going to result in the killing of 1/3 of the world's population. And the war is called the 6th trumpet war because it's going to occur as the sounding of the 6th trumpet, as described in Revelation 9:13 through 21. It's going to take place just before or shortly after the peace agreement is signed. The Bible doesn't tell us at what juncture that it's got to take place, but it has to take place before the final 3.5 years of that 7-year time period. And it could conceivably happen at any time now. In the aftermath of the 6th trumpet war, in which 2.3 to 2.4 billion human beings will have died, the cry for a world government, a global organization that can prevent war, it's going to be deafening. The international community is going to adopt. At this point, they're going to be willing to yield up their sovereignty, because think about it, 1/3 of the world's population will have been destroyed. They're going to adopt a world governing entity. The world government right now doesn't have teeth, but at that point they will. They'll be able to dictate. And the world governing entity, it's going to eliminate the possibility, they say, of global war ever taking place again. The nations of the world are going to surrender their sovereignty to the new world government so that it can eliminate war completely, according to them, which we know the Battle of Armageddon is going to be fought in the near future. And the world government's going to be the culmination of years of planning that have already been in progress, such as the Paris Climate Agreement, the Sustainable Development Goals that I've been telling you about. So for several years, it's been generally believed that there would be 2 major causes of war on the earth: conflicts between nations and religions. Right now, folks, just in the near future, we've already seen the establishment of a world government. We're going to see the establishment of a world religion. The establishment of the world government is already happening. And what Trump is wrestling with in the White House today, should I pull out of this Paris Climate Agreement, or should I stay in and go ahead and implement that agenda in the United States? That's what he's wrestling with right now. And so we need to be prayerful for our leaders, because we don't want to stay a part of that stuff. We don't want to implement Agenda 2030 here in the United States. We don't want any part of that. And so they're wrestling with huge prophetic fulfillments in our White House today. Donald Trump and the Paris Climate Agreement.
End of the Age is a production of End Time Ministries. This broadcast will be available on our website, endtime.com, in the archives section. On our website, you'll also find more information about how current events are fulfilling Bible prophecy. To reach our operators, call 1-800-END-TIME. That's 1-800-363-8463. End Time Ministries is partner supported. We would like to say thank you to our partners who made this broadcast possible. To do what Matthew 24:14 said, to reach the world with the gospel of the kingdom.